In this final segment on the solo taxonomy, we are going to examine how we can far transfer our ideas on solo to support learning and teaching in the classroom. This morning, we began by looking at the 3-2-1 of rubric design. 3 questions to ask, 2 approaches in crafting standards, and 1 key principle. It is only when we began to apply our understanding of solo to the design of rubrics that we become more relational in our understanding. And now we want to consider how solo can be applied in new and different ways and how it can support the Singapore teaching practice. These are the 24 teaching areas of the Singapore teaching practice. They're divided into 4 domains, starting with building a positive classroom culture, lesson preparation, lesson enactment, and assessment and feedback. Can you think about how solo can support one or more of these teaching areas? I would like to suggest that solo can help us develop a more principled approach in determining lesson objectives. The principle of constructive alignment suggests that good lesson design begins with establishing lesson objectives or intended learning outcomes. So what do we want students to be able to learn in order to demonstrate understanding and good performance? Thereafter, learning activities as well as assessment activities are designed to help them achieve the intended learning outcomes. So the idea of alignment has to do with both teaching and assessment needing to be aligned to the intended learning outcomes. As for the constructive aspect, it refers to the idea that students themselves must construct meaning through relevant activities. The idea of constructive alignment was conceptualized by John Biggs based on earlier work by Ralph Taylor. And this quotation here reminds us of the constructivist underpinnings of these ideas. Here, learning takes place through the active behavior of the student. It is what he does that he learns and not what the teacher does. It reminds us of the importance of student engagement and self-regulation. Earlier, we have seen how these sample verbs in the solo taxonomy are helpful in crafting standards in a rubric. I would like to suggest that they are also useful for forming intended learning outcomes and success criteria. This is an example of a learning intention and success criteria in the context of primary English. When success criteria is framed along solo levels, what it enables students to do is to know where they stand in terms of their understanding and what they need to do to advance to a higher level of understanding. Other than applying solo in determining lesson objectives and success criteria, I'd like to suggest that solo levels could also be helpful in helping us select and sequence content or progression of learning in a lesson design. So what we are concerned at this stage in the constructive alignment of lesson design is in thinking about what learning activities might be helpful in helping students reach their intended learning outcome. Here we have an example of a PE rubric that assesses the construct of students' ability to perform a short pass in a game of soccer. I invite you to look at these 5 levels of understanding and performance and consider how it can be useful in designing differentiated lessons for students according to where they are in terms of their ability to make a short pass. For example, for students who can already kick the ball in one direction to a partner, may be asked to work on kicking the ball in multiple directions. Whereas students who can already pass the ball with direction and accuracy may be put into a real gameplay situation. Other than applying solo to determine lesson objectives, to select and sequence content, I'd like to suggest that solo ideas are also helpful in planning key questions in lesson preparation. One of the ways solo can be used is in framing a hierarchy of questions or outcomes in terms of different levels of complexity. The complexity of the questions can be evaluated in terms of their expected outcomes or answers. At the unistructural level, only one relevant aspect of the presented evidence is needed. At the multistructural level, it usually requires two or more discrete and separate pieces of related information. In this case, to compare which planet is warmer, Venus or Mars. At the relational level, the question requires two or more pieces of information that are directly related or leads to an integrated understanding of the information. And finally, at the extended abstract level, it requires an abstract general principle or hypothesis that requires students to go beyond the given information. Applying solo in planning key questions enable us to build a hierarchy of questions of increasing levels of complexity. The challenge is for us to not allow our questions to remain only at the unistructural and multistructural levels, but also to ask questions that require relational and extended abstract thinking and understanding. The solo taxonomy, in summary, is a conceptual framework that provides a scaffold view of holistic understanding. Its premise is holistic, arguing that learning should not be seen as isolated, but related to other forms of knowledge. Such a qualitative framework permits us to make critical differentiations between more and less holistic forms of learning. However, the solo taxonomy exists as a conceptual hierarchy and leaves the task of designing appropriate assessment and learning activities to teachers. In the next segment, I will explain how the Patchwork Assessment method is a helpful qualitative approach and offers a practical example of designing assessment methods that enable learners to progress from unistructural to relational or extended abstract outcomes. The Patchwork Assessment is a form of assessment where students write several short pieces over time, and at the end, these patches are stitched together to make a patchwork text. Patchwork Assessment integrates the different assessment advantages of the essay in enabling students to demonstrate their understanding in a single piece of condensed work, as well as the advantages of the portfolio in extending learning beyond a point in time. So it provides an assessment structure that places a premium on students constructing and synthesizing their knowledge. The design of a patchwork assessment is characterized by three core essential elements. Firstly, there must be multiple patches, and these patches are paced over a course, and these at the end fit into a final integrative piece of assessment. This is an example of how patchwork assessment can help in the redesign of a conventional assessment in the context of English writing. Here, students are asked to write an essay based on a certain scenario. If this is the complex task that students have to do, what would be the initial patches that might be helpful for them to write in order to scaffold their understanding and to offer opportunities for feedback? In this example, the teacher had students write introductory paragraph, after which she had them work with each other to offer peer feedback and refine their ideas. Using these ideas, they work on the story development before synthesizing these ideas into their final piece. Can you see how patchwork assessment design might be useful not only for the design of a lesson in a face-to-face classroom, but also in the context of home-based learning? In the context of home-based learning, it is even more important to break a complex task into its smaller component patches so that there are opportunities for students to gather feedback on their initial thinking, to refine their writing before synthesizing these ideas into a final piece of work. In this example of a patchwork assessment, the students had to plan a healthy meal for a target group. In the first patch that's designed, they do a 3-day food record. This will help them in the next task to analyze the food intake and to identify factors that might affect food choices before making recommendations to teens. So task 1 and task 2 helps to right-size the demands of the complex task, and through which feedback opportunities are provided for students to refine their thinking before they are able to synthesize and apply their understanding to a new context. This example illustrates the integration of solo and patchwork in informing task design. Here, the complex task is for students to make up a rule to count how many sticks are needed for any number of houses. Here, the number of sticks would be the number of houses times 4 plus 1. So, by working from the complex task, it establishes the right size kind of progression that's needed. So first, students need to know how many sticks are there for 3 houses by counting the number of sticks in the figure provided. Then, if they were to add 2 more houses, what would be the number of sticks? So they could actually draw it. But up to a certain point, drawing might not be helpful when the number of houses becomes too many. So they must begin to look for a pattern of growth in order to then later develop or make up the rule. So solo and patchwork therefore provides a practical method of cohering these small tasks to a more complex task. The earlier task design could inform us about this list of success criteria that could be helpful in telling students where they stand in terms of their understanding of a linear sequence and what they need to do in order to progress to a higher level of understanding. The Patchwork Assessment enables us to break a complex task into smaller component patches and sequence them over the course of time. What this does is that it opens up opportunities for students to act on feedback and feed forward them to the next and final task. There's also opportunities for students to work collaboratively by working on different patches and coming together to synthesize their understanding. And finally, there's also options for students to suggest tasks beyond those that are prescribed by the teacher. And this opens up affordances for more students' self-regulated learning. At this juncture, I'd like to invite you to apply your learning in redesigning assessment. You can consider the context of the assessment challenge you have in mind, or work on the earlier idea on rubric design, or you can look at a new example of a bite-sized assessment or project work you currently use in your school. You may want to refer to exemplars of Patchwork Assessment on the Google site. Take about half an hour to work on this and post your ideas on Blackboard discussion board. I also invite you to give feedback to one of your classmates in order to refine or improve their thinking. I'd like to share with you the Pqp protocol that is helpful in helping to keep peer feedback sessions focused. The first P is to notice something praiseworthy about your classmates' work. Then ask a question that needs clarification and suggest one thing that can be improved.